Welcome to Lessons in Dyslexic Thinking, conversations with the world's most inspiring dyslexics, where we find out what dyslexic thinking is and how each of us can employ it to change the world. Today I'm joined by the incredible changemaker and dyslexic thinker, Her Royal Highness Princess Sarah. Princess Sarah, you've worked in the humanitarian field for more than 2 decades, from being a UN staff member in your early career to becoming an advocate for maternal newborn health. You've said, "My purpose is to make visible the invisible and to try to give their needs and suffering a voice." That sounds very much like dyslexic thinking to me. Princess Sarah, it is such an honour to have you with us today.
The pleasure is all mine.
So let's kick off with the most important question. Tell us more about your dyslexic thinking and how you think it helps you to do what you do.
I think it helps me because, to begin with, it was very much a hindrance. I was never very good at school, no matter how hard I worked, how hard I wanted to succeed. That was always out of reach for me. And so I figured out quite early on that if I was going to get where I knew I wanted to be, I was going to have to be different. I was going to have to be unconventional, and I was going to have to be a bit scrappy in order to achieve what I knew was out there for me. And I think that has made me a unique problem solver. I see things differently. I approach things very differently, and I am not afraid to be different because that's what I had to learn to do. And I hope that makes me more accomplished and my work more impactful.
It's very, very much a dyslexic thinking skill. Dyslexics make incredible change makers. They feel injustice very deeply, and they use their passion to create change. Is that what drives you?
Yes, women and girls drive me. My interest has always been in, and I suppose this is more of my dyslexic thinking, is that my interest in life is conflict. Humanitarian settings, fragile settings, the more chaotic it is, the more peaceful I find it. I see sense in it. In any crisis setting, the most vulnerable, but also the individuals with the most to contribute are women and girls. And I feel their suffering enormously. The majority of maternal mortality, morbidity, newborn mortality, stillbirths take place in humanitarian and fragile settings, and all of it is preventable. And for me, that is a sign of a terrible, terrible injustice and collective failure of governments, of international community, of the people who care so passionately to try and put an end to this.
And you've had the most incredible career at the UN and beyond. Can you tell us a bit more, or some examples of some of the change that you've helped to create?
It hasn't really been a career. It has been a long journey, I think, is what it is. And one of the reasons why it wasn't going to be a career was because I'm not conventional. The UN and the public sector is not well suited to people that think differently. If I applied for a job at the UN, I wouldn't make it past the first round. Again, I've always had to be scrappy and unconventional, and so a traditional career path was never going to be possible. But I started out as a 19-year-old intern at the UN, and I figured out how to be in the right places at the right time. And it was actually my first job out of graduate school that I started to really get a sense of that there was something very different about the way that I saw the world and how I needed to learn the world. and that, sitting and reading reams of paper and statistics and data and so on didn't make sense until I was able to go to a place. And so very early on in this journey of mine at the UN, I was in southern Iraq, and it was 8 o'clock in the morning. We got out of our cars, and immediately you could feel your face begin to sizzle in the heat, and walking into a school over a stream of sewage into a school, and over shards of glass and so on in just searing heat. It all became clear to me, all of the multifaceted issues that the community there was suffering, and also some of the solutions and how we were going to tackle them.
And your husband is involved in the Elders, which was an organisation founded by Richard Branson, Peter Gabriel and Nelson Mandela. It must be absolutely fascinating being maybe slightly removed from the centre of it.
I'm Elders adjacent, yes, or sort of Elders-in-law, I suppose, because my husband being one.
And being such a passionate change maker, that must be quite an amazing experience to see the Elders in action.
Well, first of all, they are extraordinary. And the idea behind it, the original idea behind it of having individuals who have served in whatever capacity with tremendous principle and courage, and have used their voices for the people that needed it the most, or the communities, or the issues that were not necessarily going to make them popular, but really needed the things that needed to be said, the issues that needed to be pushed, is magnificent. I think one of the big problems today is that we exist in a world where nobody likes to have the mirror held up. And so for the Elders to, they have to have tremendous courage to be able to hold that mirror up to the world leaders of today, to the industries that are polluting and exploiting and so on, and to try to make real change happen. And there is certainly an awful lot of work for them to do.
And what would your top 3 tips, or what do you think are the 3 most important things for creating change for individuals who want to be change makers?
Don't be afraid to be different. Again, particularly in the public sector. So my experience is with the world of the UN, where the donors are all powerful, because that's where the funding comes from, and organizations rely on whether or not they have money to implement their programs or not. And so I think that organizations, as a result, have become very risk averse, and they are also, extraordinarily overworked. The crisis around the world are getting larger and larger. The sheer volume of displacement, of hunger, of pain is quite overwhelming, and so there is very little scope for people to do things differently, and then there's not much encouragement for people to be different, to think outside the box. And I think that if you're going to make change, you do have to throw caution to the wind, and you have to go big. As much as it is wonderful, yes, every individual life is important, but if you're part of a system like the UN, go big or get out.
That's really, really brilliant advice. Let me take you back to school. You've talked about it a little bit earlier. When did you discover you were dyslexic?
I could not read or write until I was about 7 years old. And so that was when I was taken off to someone to figure out what was going on. It's always that discrepancy between someone's verbal ability or their obvious intelligence and then their inability to perform academically. And for me, that was very much the case.
And were there specific things that you found challenging?
I couldn't spell anything. I mean, it was really, it really touches me deep inside, the extraordinary poet that Made by Dyslexia published the poem from. And one of her lines is, I am more than the words I cannot spell. And that just about sums up everything for me. It's spectacular. And I did many, many years of boarding school. And, one of the things that makes a huge difference in an individual's life is a teacher or a parent who is there in their corner. And I didn't have either of those things because of just the circumstances. My parents lived abroad, far away, and I was in these schools, and it was a very different time. And the consequences of that, you carry that baggage for a very long time. And your confidence is shaken, your belief in yourself. It takes a lot to move beyond it, I'm afraid. It can have quite devastating consequences.
And what do you think your 7 or 8-year-old self would think about what you're doing now?
Well, I think it's actually my 12-year-old self that would be most startled. I had this terrible, in my mind anyway, it was the greatest humiliation. I'm sure that nobody else that was there at the time thought about it for more than 30 seconds. That's the other thing, I think, is that I wish that my younger self knew that the things often that we see as failures and humiliations and so on, largely nobody else is paying attention or cares or thinks of it as seriously as you do. But I was in a British boarding school. I was forced to stand up in a pulpit and do a reading in church. And I got to the word Nebuchadnezzar. And then for the next couple of decades, I really never moved beyond that word. And such was my humiliation. I got halfway through a word and then that's it. I never spoke in public. I didn't speak up in school when I was a student. I did not speak in a meeting as I tried to build a career. And then when I became an ambassador's wife, I certainly wouldn't have the courage to speak in a table-wide conversation because the shame was too great.
It runs deep, doesn't it?
It really does. And it is so tragic because that the potential that we lose, the pain that the individual feels for no reason of their own. And I hope we live in a much kinder world now, a much more supportive world now to dyslexic thinking and to people who, even if they are diagnosed, are still struggling.
And that takes us to very nicely to our mission, which is to empower dyslexic thinking in every school, every home, every workplace. We do know what needs to happen. We need to make sure that there is the right understanding of dyslexic strengths and the knowledge to be able to support dyslexics in work and in education. What message would you have for our community to help us make that happen?
I think that we need an almost seismic cultural shift in the way that we understand thinking. So I have 3 dyslexic children, and with all of them, I have been in situations where I have been told by other parents, by their schools themselves, that there would be ways to mask the fact that my children had accommodations when they took exams and this sort of thing. I was wearing the T-shirt from my daughter's school in New York once, and it's a school specifically for children who learn differently. And someone said to me how brave I was that I would walk around, advertising a school for people who learn differently. That I don't understand. I am very forthright about the fact that I'm dyslexic. I am very forthright about the fact that my children are dyslexic. I'm asking myself why I'm like that actually now as I say it, because I never wanted them to be in a position where it was hidden or where it was something to be ashamed of. It was a fact, and therefore there would be certain things that would be most supportive to them, because schooling, today's education, doesn't work for most people. In fact, we are not cookie cutters. We don't want to have children raised as cookie cutters. We want them to be empathetic. We want them to be quirky. If you have a room full of a cookie cutter type community, we become over expert in things. We never see things differently. And I think that that's one of the problems. Experts speak to themselves. You speak in your own language. You use your own acronyms. You never think about busting out. You go to a conference and you only speak or listen to the things that are in your particular lane. And I think that if you're a dyslexic thinker, if we value all of the different elements that make up dyslexic thinking, then we will be in a much more creative, interesting, problem-solving space. I would rather have a doctor who was empathetic and who knew when to stop and to talk like a human and not as a clinician, than someone who just saw me as a statistic.
And if you had one piece of advice for other dyslexics, young or old, what would that be?
Oh, be loud and proud. I think, I love made by dyslexia. I think I want it on a T-shirt. I want to show people that I am made up of all of my different parts, my dyslexic thinking, my experiences, for better or for worse. All of them have been responsible for turning me into the person that I am today, which is a fierce mother of 3 dyslexics, an advocate for children to have access to support if they need it, because I think that that's one of the huge problems, is that we've created very complex ways, and certainly, raising children in the US, ridiculously expensive ways for children to be diagnosed and then to be able to seek support. And so I speak as often as I can about that issue to people in my community in New York, and as a fearless activist for the women and newborns and girls that have the least options in the world and have never had a voice.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by Microsoft, who, like us, are passionate about empowering dyslexic thinking. Their free tool, Immersive Reader, helps every dyslexic with reading and comprehension. Find out more by clicking the Microsoft link in the podcast notes. And if you'd like to find out more about what dyslexic thinking skills are and how to recognise them in schools, at work or at home, you can take our free training now. Empowering Dyslexic Thinking in Schools, available on Microsoft Learn, and Empowering Dyslexic Thinking at Work, available on LinkedIn Learning. And please subscribe so you don't miss out on future lessons in dyslexic thinking.